There is a garden, there is a city, and there's a kingdom of God. And it is beautiful, and he is bringing it right now into our midst.
One of the ways that I've been growing in my relationship with God, in my understanding of who he is just appreciating the friendship that he has offered to me. A friendship with him that is real, that is authentic, where I can share with him what's on my heart. I can lean into him throughout my day. God doesn't just want us to know him in one sense, but really know him personally.
His love and even desiring a relationship with me, that he would invite me to draw near to him, is just this kind of ridiculous and unbelievable thing, but it's our reality that we get to have a relationship with the God of the universe, that he desires that with us. And I think that that's just something that he's been really powerfully showing me lately.
A friend said to me recently, if we aren't growing and changing constantly, that something's wrong. And I thought that was interesting, the fact that we're made in the image of God, an unchanging one, but yet that we should always be changing. And I realized that we're becoming more like him. We're becoming more like who he's designed us to be. And I think that's been a theme in our worship songs lately, Faithful to the End and Raise a Hallelujah. I think those songs really speak to the unchanging nature of God, even through the ups and downs of life, that he remains constant, his love remains constant in our lives.
So I have this spiritual discipline, which I call my prayer walks with Harley. Harley, my dog, the two of us set off for about a half an hour of walking. As Harley and I are walking along, I imagine Jesus just being right there along with us, almost like the two on the road to Emmaus, and we're just talking and communicating, and it's just shaped this deep awareness. And I think for a lot of us, the reason we are not aware of God's presence is because we're not looking, we're not paying attention.
And so I am just hungry and thirsty for people to have those kind of encounters where we are interacting on a personal level and on a corporate level with the living God, knowing that we can come to him for healing, we can come to him for provision, we can come to him for rest, but that when we meet with him, he draws near to us in the same way. And I think that there is nothing like that.
And so music is one of those ways that we get to do that, by lifting our voices and our hearts to him and experiencing in a very personal, intimate way that he is with us, he loves us, he's for us, and he's inviting us into something deeper.
I really appreciate our worship leaders sharing their own heart and their journey about how they are really passionately pursuing after God. Because that is what they are invited to do then every Sunday, is help you and I wind up pursuing God, knowing God, experiencing God. So I'm just really grateful for their own personal journeys on those particular things. Hey guys, thanks for being here today, and welcome if you're joining us by live stream. So glad that you're a part of us, and really hope that you'll get a sense of what we are here to talk about today. And really there's probably lots of reasons why people come to church, but the deepest reason why I believe we're here is we're looking to get a connection with God. We somehow want to get in touch with what's transcendent, what's a lot bigger than we are, and we come out of our busy week. Sometimes we don't feel God at all, but we just come here because we really want to connect with God. I went to a Bruce Springsteen concert many years ago with Becky, and it was the Rising tour that Springsteen and his band did. And if you guys remember that particular tour, it took place after 9/11 and the collapse of the Twin Towers, and he wrote an album where he was especially trying to help all of us, but maybe that part of the country in particular, New York, Northern Jersey, how to really help us all process with the grief, the anger, the confusion, the sadness, the loss that was experienced during that particular attack. And the album is full of prayers and thoughts, and it's pretty remarkable. Becky and I were up at the Meadowlands, and so if you can think of the Meadowlands, we're up there in that part of the country where so many people that were at that concert, well, I mean, that was their city, that was their home, that was their territory, that was their people, their family, their friends. And Springsteen's putting on a really great concert, which he always does, but there came a point when he took almost an hour and went through most of the Rising album. And Becky and I wound up looking around. It was pretty remarkable what was going on. I mean, we saw people, their eyes were closed. They had their hands up like this. People were like, I mean, for an hour, it's like literally, it was no longer a concert. It had turned into a worship experience. It was a worship event. And what was going on is through these songs, Springsteen was helping people connect with their deepest needs and longings inside. And he's trying to help them connect with somebody who's a whole lot bigger. The only person that could help them make sense out of this horrific tragedy that had taken place is just amazing to watch. And so you see what happens is out there in our culture day to day, our culture is not helping us get in touch with the transcendent God. And every now and then we find artists like Springsteen and they do. And people wind up going to concerts and the concerts become worship experiences. When I was talking to Brian Newman about that, he said the same thing happens at U2 concerts. And often Bono and the band will finish up with Psalm 40. I'd never seen that, and so I actually went out and did a little Google and brought up a number of YouTube Psalm 40 videos. And what's going on is, so at the end of this rock concert, Bono's telling people, be careful going home there, just be safe. And then they finish with a secular song called Psalm 40. What's Psalm 40? Well, literally, it's the words from Psalm 40. And Bono's singing, he's singing a psalm to the audience. And there's a point where he backs away from the microphone and you hear the entire audience just singing Psalm 40, waiting patiently for the Lord. It's like what Bono and U2 do, they craft a worship experience. You're not just going to a concert, you're going to touch something much bigger. I mean, one of his most famous songs, I still haven't found what I'm looking for. There's times when you just hear the audience shouting out, I still haven't found what I'm looking for. And they're looking and they're trying to get in touch with the transcendent. I think that's why we're here today. We're always looking to get in touch with the transcendent, with something that's really big. By the way, it's not just some of these modern artists who are really in touch with those things themselves that are helping us do that, but Pascal wound up having this wonderful statement, which we've told you guys before. There is a God-shaped vacuum inside every one of us. There's an emptiness, there's a spaciousness. And it's looking to be filled with something really big. And whenever we try and fill that spaciousness with something that's local and temporary, it just doesn't work and we're dissatisfied because it's meant to be filled only by the Creator God, and especially through the revelation of Jesus. Pascal wasn't the first to think about that. You can go back to the 4th century and Augustine says, God, our hearts are restless until they find their rest in thee. But Augustine didn't invent. You can go back to the Psalms, and all through the Psalms, you hear the writer saying, Lord, I desire you, I seek you, earnestly I seek you. Like a deer in this parched desert, I'm just seeking you. I thirst for you. And there's just that awareness that we're looking for something really big, something powerful, something beautiful. For many years, I would read once a year a little book called The Pursuit of God by A.W. Tozer. And in that book, Tozer's kind of naming what all these folks are trying to do. We're in the pursuit of something really big. What was really interesting is after he wrote that book, he said, hey, I made a mistake. I should have written another book first. He wrote a book then called God's Pursuit of Us. And wow, that is so true, because the only reason you and I are able to pursue God is this transcendent, really big, beautiful God is seeking. Never stops seeking after you and I. God's search for us, God's pursuit of us makes possible our pursuit of God. It's been my life story, my life journey. What I'd like to do is read a few verses from Romans chapter 12, and I'm going to be reading in the translation, The Message. There'll be a few other verses we'll look at as well. It's a very fresh translation. I think you'll enjoy this. But picking up in Romans 12, verse 1. So here's what I want you to do, God helping you. Take your everyday, ordinary life, your sleeping, eating, going to work, walking around life, and place this before God as an offering. Embracing what God does for you is the best thing that you can do for Him. Don't become so well adjusted to your culture that you fit into it without even thinking. Wow, we could do a whole series on that. Instead, fix your attention on God. You'll be changed from the inside out. Readily recognize what He wants from you and then quickly respond to it. Unlike the culture around you that's always dragging you down to its level of immaturity, and wow, can it drag us down to some pretty low levels, God brings out the best in you. He develops well-formed maturity in you. And if you remember back to the first week when Brian New and I kicked off this series, one of the verses we used was from Philippians chapter 1, verse 6, that God is at work right now, and He's taking us toward this flourishing finish. The same author wrote those words as saying, right now, God is bringing out the best in you, developing a well-formed maturity inside of you. I'm speaking to you, Paul says, out of deep gratitude for all that God has given me. especially as I have responsibilities in relation to you. Living then, as every one of you does, in pure grace, it's important that you do not misinterpret yourselves as people are bringing all this goodness to God. No, God brings it all to us. The only accurate way to understand ourselves is by what God is and by what he does for us, not by what we are and what we do for him. Let me repeat that last verse there. The only accurate way to understand ourselves is by what God is and by what he does for us. Last week, Aaron Anderson used a phrase from John Calvin. True wisdom consists of two things, knowing ourselves and knowing who God is. And Calvin went on and said, which one comes first? Do you know God first and then you know yourself? Do you know yourself first and then you know God? Calvin said it really doesn't matter because those two things are interwoven. They lead together. By the way, so today is the third week in a row that we mentioned the name John Calvin. And people are saying, who's John Calvin? He's kind of the Albert Einstein of theologians. Lived a couple centuries ago, and just like Albert Einstein came along and as he looked at the nature of reality and quantum physics, he just gave us a whole new, beautiful way of understanding reality. That's exactly what John Calvin did centuries ago. He came along with this bold, beautiful, breathtaking, brilliant way of understanding God, the ultimate reality, and he wrote so much about that. And so we've been indebted to him ever since, and we've been quoting him ever since. The ancient Greeks were right to say, seek understanding of yourself. Seek to know yourself. They were right. The ancient theologians didn't disagree with the philosophers. They came along and said, yes, know yourself, but know God as well. And really, when you know God, you will come to know really who you are. I mean, I've been on that journey for my whole life, just seeking to know God. I mean, I remember as a kid, and by the way, when I was a kid, when I was in elementary school, I could not have named to you what I'm going to now. So this is with a long retrospective look back. But as in elementary school, I was just fascinated with something big out there. I didn't even know what it was that I was fascinated with. And so back then, as a kid, I read comic books. I read superhero comic books. I was just trying to get in touch with something bigger than myself. And I got a little bit older in middle school, and I started reading the old mythologies. I read the Greek and Roman mythologies. I moved on to the Egyptian mythologies. I moved on to the Norse mythologies. I was just trying to get a sense of something that's bigger than what this ordinary life on earth is. I moved into high school, and I became an avid reader of the fantasy genre and the supernatural genre. And again, I was just saying, there's got to be something more than just this sort of, what I see around me. And by the way, there's a lot of people. It's one of the leading genres of movies and books that there are because people are looking to get connected because our culture isn't doing a very good job helping us know what's really out there. Eventually, I went to college and I discovered Jesus Christ. I found what my heart had been searching for all those years, and I found that indeed Christ was big enough to come in and fill that emptiness and that spaciousness, and the restlessness wound up dissipating in some very major ways. But along the way, I was really cautioned, Brian, make sure that your God never becomes too small. Don't allow Jesus to become a too small God. Let Jesus be the big God that he is. You see, I don't need a small God, neither do you. I do not need a tame God, and neither do you. I don't need a God who's at my beck and call. I don't need a butler. I don't need a genie that I can let out of the bottle. That's not the kind of God that I need. I don't need a God who's just a little bigger than my imagination and a little better than my needs. I don't need that kind of God. I need a really, really big God. And as I would read through the pages of the Bible, I just discovered this really big God. Oh, I still remember the first time I read Isaiah chapter 6, the holiness of God. It's like, I just said, God, you're holy. I just had this impression of the holiness of God. I read Isaiah chapter 40. It's the sovereign God and just how big and majestic and supreme God is. And it was a breathtaking chapter. I came to Psalm 139 and I read about this God who is just always there. He's never apart from us. You can't go anywhere and get away from God. And these images of God just helped me see how big he is. I got to the New Testament and read the stories of Jesus, and I found this really big God is so deeply personal and intimate and close to us. I mean, that was the kind of God that I needed. And that's the kind of God that Paul is describing here. He doesn't want any of us to have a too small God. And so in Romans chapter 12, he tells us three things about just this right-sized God. And number one, he says, number one lesson you got to get right, This is the number one thing I've been trying to get right my whole life. God is God and I'm not. Now you think that's pretty obvious, right? Of course, Brian, you're not God. And of course God is God. But isn't that our deepest struggle? Letting God be God. In Isaiah chapter 58, we read these words. I don't think the way you think. God says that. The way you work isn't the way I work. For as the sky soars above earth, so the way I work surpasses the way you work, and the way I think is beyond the way that you think. Man, that's hard to learn. I keep on thinking my way is the best way, and God comes and says, well, Brian, your way is like really kind of pathetic. My way's so much better, so much higher. Let me show you my way. I have these little paltry, puny thoughts, and God comes on and says, Brian, my thoughts are so much bigger. So listen, along the way, I've discovered that I have not yet been disappointed when I have chosen the way of God. I've not yet been disappointed. You see, my way and my thoughts are, well, don't forgive those people who hurt you. Now, when I've chosen not to forgive, I've become very disappointed, and so have they. But when I've chosen God's way of forgiveness, I've not yet been disappointed. I've not yet been disappointed at forgiving somebody. How about you? I've not yet been disappointed when God says, Brian, love your enemy. Well, okay, frankly, I don't have too many enemies, but there are a few people that haven't liked me. And every now and then I meet somebody who doesn't like me. I know you're thinking, how's that possible? But then I want to be a little mean to those individuals. I'd like to be a little bit unkind. At least I would like to ignore them as if they don't exist. And God comes along and says, Brian, you can't do that. That's like your silly way of thinking. Here's my way of thinking. It's called love your enemies. Do good to those who don't do good to you. And I tell you, along the way, I've not yet been disappointed at choosing to do that. Becky and I have never been disappointed that we chose to follow God's instructions on generosity and faithfulness and just try as much as we can to get our financial resources in disposal for his beautiful works and for this church in particular. We just have never been disappointed at choosing that. I've never been disappointed when God says, Brian, I need you to go and do this particular assignment. And I say, I don't want to do that assignment. I've just not yet been disappointed by following God's ways. I mean, have you? Have you really been disappointed by doing things God's way? I don't think you have. I think what's usually going on is you're disappointed by doing things your way and wondering, well, why isn't God blessing my way? Well, because it's not his way. As high as the heavens are above the earth, his ways and thoughts are different. And so really, that's part of what I'm talking about. That's been my lifelong struggle. Lesson number one is let God be God. God is God and Brian Rice is not. In Genesis chapter 32, there's a guy named Jacob, and man, his whole story has been a guy who has not let God be God. Jacob has been his own God. And Jacob has made a royal mess of everything. Anything he has touched, he has messed up. His family doesn't like him. His friends don't like him. His father-in-law can't stand him. The guy's life is a ruin. And he's now, after being away he's going back home, and he's thinking, I think my brother's going to come out and kill me. That's how bad it's gotten. And so he spends the night wrestling with God in prayer. And he said, God, I messed up everything I've touched. And so he's wrestling with God. Literally, the physical presence of God, it's called the angel of the Lord, comes down and wrestles with Jacob. And at the end of the night and early morning, what happens is the angel of the Lord touches Jacob, just kind of wrenches his hip out, and he says, I'm going to change your name. By the way, Jacob means deceiver. Mom and dad, maybe you don't want to name your kid Deceiver. Might not be the best thing. Don't name your child Ichabod, the glorious departed either. There's some really interesting names in the Old Testament. You don't want to name your kids those kinds of things. But in this case, God comes on and says, your name's no longer going to be Deceiver. I'm going to give you a new name. And your new name is Israel. Okay, we all know the word Israel. We all know the nation Israel. You know what the name means? Most likely it means one who struggles with God. Isn't that great? The very name of Israel means one who struggles with God. I think that's who we all are. We're all named Israel, people who struggle with God. In fact, one of the reasons I love this book so much, it is so brutally honest about people who struggle with God. God comes to Jeremiah, the prophet, and says, Jeremiah, I've got an assignment for you. You're not going to like it. And Jeremiah says, you're right, I don't like it. And so Jeremiah struggles with God about this assignment. God comes to another prophet, Jonah, and says, hey, there's a people over there. I know you can't stand them, but I love them. So I need you to go and bring a message of redemption, healing, and love and forgiveness. And Jonah says, no, I'm not going to do that. Jonah struggles with God. God comes to Job, and here's Job is just languishing in crisis and suffering. His life is as broken as it possibly can be. And Job is just struggling with God. God, what is going on in my life? And then there's Ruth and Naomi. They're a widow and an orphan, and they're living in a foreign land, and they're destitute, and they're impoverished, and they're probably going to be a whole lot worse than that. They struggle with God about their future. And then there's a Queen Esther who is the queen for one of the most mightiest rulers in that time, and she is positioned to do something amazing for God, but wow, is they ever going to come at great risk, and she just struggles with God. Just story after story after story, people who are struggling with God. Will we let God be God, or are we going to try and be God? And what Paul is saying is, man, take this thing called your life, this everyday, ordinary, go to work, eating, sleeping life. You take it and you place it before God as an offering. Let him have it because he's God. And then embrace God. Lesson number one, that we hope we are here to help you keep on learning that lesson over and over and over. The culture is going to work against you on that one. Paul actually talks about the culture, and he says, don't just conform to this culture without even thinking about it. He goes on and says, if you do, this culture is going to drag you down to its lowest level of immaturity. Our culture will do whatever it can to keep you from living close to God. Our culture is on a mission to keep you apart from God. Our culture is on a mission to keep you without God. Our culture is on a mission to say to you, hey, your own self-absorbed, self-centered, self-directed, self-ambitious will and agenda is the single most important thing there is in the universe, and you better do whatever you can to get your way. That's what our culture is going to do. And Paul says, you got to let God be God. You got to let go of all that kind of stuff. Lesson number one. Lesson number two. God is pure grace. Pure grace. Actually uses the language in there, living then as every one of you do, in pure grace. Let me take you back to a place in the Old Testament, Exodus chapter 34. Every now and then, Christians get these really weird ideas. We think, well, the God of the New Testament is lovey-dovey, and the God of the Old Testament is mean and grouchy and grumpy, and nothing could be further from the truth. Listen to how God is described. Way back in Exodus. God, a God of mercy and grace, endlessly patient, so much love, so deeply true, loyal in love to you for 1,000 generations, forgiving iniquity and rebellion and sin and foolishness and failures and flaws and mistakes and meanness and unforgiveness and badness and evil and all that is fundamentally broken. He is so generous in forgiving us all of those things. Well, now, still, he doesn't ignore sin. In fact, he's going to do something amazing about our sin. He's going to have to do that through Jesus Christ, but so much love. You know, there's a word in Hebrew, it's the word hesed, and it's actually a really thick word. It has a lot of meaning to it. And so when some of the first translators are trying to figure out how do you translate this Hebrew word hesed, they actually had a little bit of a trouble. They said, well, let's use the word love, but the word is more than that. They said, well, let's just use the word kindness. Well, no, the word is more than that. And so one of the translators came up with this brilliant idea. Let's make a whole new word that never existed before. And so they literally made a new word on the spot. It's called loving kindness. Now, you've heard the language loving kindness. It's all one word. At one time, it did not exist, but then a translator came along and said, we need to make up a new word to describe just how big our God is. He's a God of loving kindness. Other translations now say steadfast love, this ongoing covenantal loyalty, lots of different words. But listen, loyal in love to you forever and ever. So much love. And then in the New Testament, it just gets explained better and better than ever. See, that's where Paul lives, in pure grace. He lives in so much love, so much loving kindness. Man, you got to get this one figured out. You got to. For almost 40 years, our founding pastor, Steve Almquist, just preached this message. He just never stopped trying to help you live in so much love, live in so much pure grace. Look, I don't want this to sound weird, but I got this one figured out at least 30 years ago for myself personally, maybe further back than that. There's not a single day that I wake up that I'm wondering, does God love me? Now, okay, listen, I wake up almost every single day saying, hey, there's some not nice things about Brian Rice. Now, I know you find it hard to believe. Just bear with me for a moment, okay? I wake up almost every single day and say, hey, there's some things about Brian Rice that I don't like. There's some things about Brian Rice that needs to get a little better. There's some things about Brian Rice that could use a whole heck of a lot of improvement. But I never wake up a single day wondering, does God love me? I've got that one settled long ago. Guys, you need to get that one settled. If you don't, you're going to live with worry and fear and guilt and shame and condemnation and confusion. And after a while, you're going to do something really bad. You're going to say, okay, that's it. God can't forgive that one, and maybe I don't even want to go back to church because it's too embarrassing. And I've talked to people that they've just blown marriages. I mean, they've blown it big time. And they just brought a whole lot of, and they say, oh, God, do you still love me? I don't think you do, because nobody else loves me. I mean, I know people have done some stuff sexually, it's just really junky, really bad, and they, oh, God can't possibly still love me. I mean, I know people have done all kinds of stuff, and they just, does God still love me? Can he love me? Do I have to clean myself up a little bit? And, oh, so much love. Loyal in love to 1,000 generations, forgiving everything imaginable, and maybe some things that we don't even want to try to imagine. He forgives it all. Hey guys, look, here's what. Today, I hope just today, you have to be able to leave from here knowing you are forgiven. There's no condemnation. If you came in here feeling condemnation, you got to leave it right here today. Don't take condemnation with you. If you came in here today just feeling horrendously guilty about some stuff, you got to leave the guilt here. If you came in just with some shame about maybe who you are and what's going on, you got to leave that here. If you've come in, you just got to leave all that junk here because there is so much love and pure grace. You got to get that one settled. Now, by the way, we will be here for you as long as it takes for us to help you get that one settled, okay? But you got to get it settled. Now, when you do, please don't ever take it for granted. Don't ever take grace. Don't ever take so much love for granted. Don't ever do that. Do what Paul says. Take it with gratitude. Deep gratitude. Paul lives in pure grace. He lives in pure grace with deep gratitude. Jesus, thank you for what you've done. I can hardly believe it, but I know it's true. Thank you. So much love. That's the kind of big God we need, isn't it? We need a God who's bigger than all of our mess ups and foul ups and everything. We need a really big God of grace. Here's the third thing that Paul says. This God who is letting God be God and not trying to be God yourself, living in this pure love, grace, loving kindness of God. The third thing is God changes you. He's big enough to do that. He changes you. He said, fix your attention on God. You'll be changed from the inside out. That's beautiful. As we begin to fix our attention, our focus more and more on God, we realize that there's something going on inside of us. And that's why a lot of times you go to counseling, you go to our counseling center, and they're just trying to help you focus on God. You think, well, I came in here, I've got this problem. Let's focus on this problem. First say, hey, let's just focus a little bit on God. Because as you focus on God, you begin to realize how great he is and how good he is and how much love he has. That starts to change you on the inside. He brings out the best in you. He develops this well-formed maturity in you. Listen, it's what God does. It's who he is. It's what God does. Brings out the best in us. That's what he wants. His so much love is not just to forgive you, and not just so you can deal with guilt and shame, but as important as those things are, his so much love is to change you into the kind of person you'd long to be, but you've long since given up any possibility of becoming such a person. God doesn't ever give up so much love, he's going to change you. And even though these couple verses haven't mentioned Jesus in these three, Paul talks about Jesus a lot in the previous chapters, he's going to talk about Jesus more. But really what Paul is saying is we want to fix our attention on Jesus. John chapter 10, verse 10. Jesus says, I came that you might have this kind of life that's being talked about here, this real and eternal, more and better life than you ever dreamed possible. See, that's who Jesus is. He's life, and that's what Jesus does. He brings us this kind of life. He brings us into connection with the Father in heaven. He brings us into this friendship and joy and comfort with him. So much love through Jesus. So much power, so much grace through Jesus. And so we're going to just take a few moments, and the worship team will have a little bit of soft music playing. And then we'll finish with 2 worship songs. But for just a few moments, we'd just like to be a little quiet and fixing our attention on Jesus. Just let you reflect there for a moment. Maybe have a couple of your own prayers, a couple of your own thoughts, or just sit silently and enjoy him. Why don't you bow your heads in prayer if you like, or keep your eyes open. It's okay. Whatever you want. And maybe you just want to say, God, it's time for you to be God. I'm tired of trying to be God. You be God. Maybe say this, say, God, show me your ways and I'll walk in the way you want me to walk. Just show me what it is. So much love. Hey, why don't you imagine right now, Jesus is sitting beside you and suddenly you feel this arm around your shoulders just pulling you in real close. That's the so much love, pure grace of Jesus. He's never going to stop showing you all the love that he has for you. You can count on it. Every day, fresh starts, second chances, new beginnings. Every single day. Right now, he's at work to change you. He's got some new things he wants to do. There's some more best that he wants to start bringing out of you this week. Isn't that wonderful? This week, Jesus is going to walk with you to bring the best out of you. I wonder what that is. Why don't you ask him? Jesus, what's the best that you want to bring into my life this week? Let Jesus be God today. Let Jesus be your God. So much love.
Lord, I'm amazed by you. Lord, I'm amazed by you. Lord, I'm amazed by you. How you love me. Lord, I'm amazed by you. Lord, I'm amazed by you. Lord, I'm amazed by you. How you